All right. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Keisha Ragu. I am the Global Education Manager here at the Estée Lauder Companies at the Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity Center of Excellence. And I am just excited to come before you today to discuss our Employee Resource Group Intersectionality panel featuring the very own and long-awaited featured speaker, Marilou Marshall, our Chief Diversity Officer. So welcome again on behalf of this wonderful partnership, the She's Howard Own Your Power. So before we dive in, I want to talk to you a little bit about this special moment that we're in today. We are in the month of June. Month of June, we celebrate not only Pride Month, but many other things. But at the heart of it all, when we think about Pride Month, allyship, and the Black community, at the root of it all, we're focusing on social justice and equality. So this concept of intersectionality comes to play. Kimberly Crenshaw, who is a law professor and philosopher, and also a social justice activist, developed this theory of intersectionality. Some of you may be familiar. Some of you, this is the first time, and some of you may say, I heard it, not really sure what it always referred to. So just to lay some groundwork before we dive in, intersectionality really is a coined term that focused on these overlapping social identities that result in different social privileges and also inequalities, particularly for marginalized or underrepresented groups. So these are the inequalities that unfortunately we know we're too familiar with, right? Different forms of discrimination, racism, sexism, classism, and many others. So for example, with my different identities, I am a Black woman, I'm female, I'm Guyanese American with West Indian culture, and I'm introverted. And many people may not know that until I share these different identities with individuals. And a lot of times I look at some of these identities and I may say, well, I will let everyone know. And sometimes I may say, I'll hide certain things. And we'll talk a little bit about that covering aspect. Today, when we meet the panel and when we meet with our speaker, we'll learn some more about these different intersections, and you'll see this illustration show up more often. I'd like to take the time to introduce our speaker for this evening, Marilou Marshall, that we'll spend a few minutes with together. But by ways of her bio, Marilou Marshall is the Senior Vice President, Executive Management and Chief Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity Officer of the Estée Lauder Companies. She leads the company's enterprise-wide inclusion, diversity, and equity program and works closely with executive management on various business matters. She is deeply passionate about inclusion, diversity, and equity as a first-generation American in her family, born into a Cuban family, and is responsible for driving the company's longstanding inclusion, diversity, and equity values across the organization, its culture, and its business. Marilou joined the company in 1998 as Vice President of Human Resources for North America, a position she held long onto until her promotion to Senior Vice President of Global Human Resources in 2006, assuming her current role in 2017. Marilou possesses what I would call a sophisticated understanding of the merits of diverse backgrounds, perspectives, and experiences, as the provenance of her career itself has been highly diverse. Marilou began her career as a trial attorney with the Organized Crime and Racketeering Section of the United States Department of Justice, and continued her government service as Deputy Director of the Commission on the Review of National Policy Toward Gambling. This was a joint congressional and presidential commission. Thereafter, she worked in the private sector as Vice President of Special Projects of Playboy Enterprises and as Senior Vice President and General Counsel for the luxury shipping company Cunard Line. Marilou graduated from the University of Miami, receiving her BBA and JD degrees, the first woman in her family to attend college. She is now a member of the Board of Trustees of the University of Miami and a proud member of the board's Academic Affairs Committee. I'd like to welcome Marilou Marshall. Hi, Marilou.
Hi, Keisha. That's a beautiful introduction. Thank you very much. And I would have never guessed that you were introverted.
I know, people tell me that all the time. And I have to say, everyone on the call, I work very closely with Marilou Marshall. I report into her. And so we have this special bond. So it's always, wonderful when we can unpack what are these unique identities that we all have. And you can see Marilou's on the slide here. Marilou, again, welcome tonight. Again, our conversation is centered around intersectionality. Can you start off by sharing a little bit of what we're seeing here about your intersectionality?
Yes, of course. And by the way, thank you, She's Howard, for inviting me to be a speaker tonight. I've watched all of your programs. I've listened carefully. I've applauded you from behind, and it's a pleasure and a privilege to be able to talk to you directly. You can see what my intersectionalities are, and the three that were probably the most the three that were the most impactful in my growing up, in my years coming to where I am today, is gender, female, age, baby boomer, and ethnicity, Cuban American. I say that because at the time I came of age, and always knew I wanted to go to law school, by the way, from a young age, I decided I wanted to go to law school. And my mother, a single mother, made it clear to me that the only way that was going to happen was with scholarships. So I studied hard and I did well in school. But at the time I was coming of age, women were not particularly welcomed in law school. And Cuban women in particular were very scarce, if not non-existent. And my mother and I decided that in order to ensure that I could get my scholarship, we needed to cover. We didn't know that word then. We didn't know the word cover, but that's what we did. We covered. And with my mother's permission, we went to court. I was a minor child at the time. We went to court and changed my name. The name on my birth certificate is Maria Luisa Garcia. The name was changed. I presented myself as an Anglo-Saxon student with high grades. I got my scholarships. It was a means to an end. And what that has done for me has given me the opportunity to give back and to pay forward. Because from the day I graduated from law school, I have worked on behalf of Hispanic students. I have worked more recently as a member of the board to ensure that Hispanic and Latino students today do not feel that they had to do what I did to cover. I felt that it was something that was necessary in order for me to achieve and accomplish or get the tools that I needed in order to do what I'm doing now. And it has in many ways led to what I do today. The importance of making a difference in the world of inclusion, diversity, and equity has been the highlight of my career. I have had some wonderful career experiences along the way. I've enjoyed every job I've ever had. I particularly love working for the Estée Lauder organization. Why? Because inclusion and diversity is part of the DNA of this company. It's not something we just figured out how to do a few years ago because it was the politically correct thing to do. It's something we've been doing since I was appointed to the Chief Diversity Officer position in 2005. So enough talking from me, Keisha, but thank you for giving me that platform.
Oh, absolutely. And thank you for the courageous conversation that you're having with us and opening up about that. So I know you started off in your career after law school, went into as a trial attorney. You've had the title of Chief Diversity Officer since the inception in 2005. Can you tell us why creating the inclusion, diversity, and equity team from the ground up was so important to you?
Well, when I first started this journey, it was really a compliance function, and it was a very US-centric function. But we knew it was more than that. And we knew that diversity, although it has different definitions in different parts of the world, was an issue and a concern and an imperative for the Estée Lauder companies everywhere in the world. We also knew that irrespective of how one defines diversity, inclusion is also important everywhere in the world. The creation of an environment where everyone is valued and respected, where everyone has that sense of belonging, was something that we needed to express. And obviously it couldn't be expressed by one person sitting in the New York office. So we started trying to develop a team. It took us a while, I might add. And at the time I was part of the human resources department. So I was able to deploy members of the Human Resources Department to do some inclusion and diversity work while they were doing their human resources work. And I'm proud to say today we do have a global organization. All of our regions have inclusion, diversity, and equity councils, task forces, committees, whatever the name is. And in a relatively few years, we have gained the traction that we needed to gain in order to ensure that every part of our organization has inclusion, diversity, and equity embedded in their DNA.
Absolutely. And as a diversity practitioner myself, I know this is definitely a journey for many organizations, starting at an awareness stage. And here at Estée Lauder companies, we have been progressing throughout this journey. One of the ways that I noticed that we have made great milestones and strides is through the creation of employee resource groups. I'd love to hear from you to talk about how these employee resource groups are viewed as an element of inclusion, diversity, and equity, and are embedded into what you refer to as the DNA of the company. Why are they so important to you, the organization as a whole?
Wow, they're the lifeblood of inclusion and diversity in many ways, particularly in this past year of COVID. What the employee resource groups have done is they have enabled the creation of a sense of community, a sense of a safe place to go and talk and listen and learn. We started with 4 employee resource groups 8 years ago, all in the United States. Pilot program, we love to pilot things at Estée Lauder, so we piloted the first 4 in the United States. And I'm proud to say we now have 44 globally with over 6,000 members. We have made sure that our launches of employee resource groups have made clear to the employees that this is a grassroots initiative. This is not something we impose as a corporation on anyone. This is a grassroots initiative. The members of these groups have come together voluntarily and come to us to say, we want to form this group. And what we do is we give them a toolkit. We tell them this is what an ERG is, and this is what it is not. Those are the guardrails. Within those guardrails, they form their own organization, their own leadership, their own co-chairs. They have 4 pillars. They all have the same 4 pillars. They have philanthropy, professional development and networking, leadership, and business alignment. But within that, they define their own destiny, so to speak. And it has been an incredibly engaging opportunity for employees throughout the organization, and now I can truly say throughout the world, to participate in a way in addition to their day job.
Absolutely. And we are going to have the ability to hear from some of our outstanding members across our employee resource groups. But I can say, Marilou, just from my time here at Estée Lauder Companies, they have been a lifeline to fostering even deeper connections and fostering that psychological safety throughout the organization and feeling more connected. So Marilou, hold tight. Let's hear from some of the panel, and I'll bring you back in a minute. So ladies and gentlemen, everyone on the call, we're going to hear from a few of the representatives from our employee resource groups, and let's do a quick intro. I'd like to first introduce Anna Sanga. Anna, please share a little bit about yourself and what we see here in terms of your intersectionality.
Sure, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on this panel. I'm super excited. Hi, everyone. My name is Anna Sanga. I am the Global Merchandising Manager at MAC Cosmetics. I've been in the beauty industry for about a decade. I've been at ELC for 3 years out of that decade. And as Keisha mentioned, I am one of the co-chairs of Welcome, which is the LGBTQIA+ employee resource group. So super excited to be here, especially during Pride Month, to talk about intersectionality, which is a very important topic for us. So as you can see here, I have 5 little buckets. It was actually pretty hard to deduce it to these 5, but I'm female, I'm Japanese, I'm married, I'm an immigrant, and I'm queer and pansexual. So just to speak a little bit to each of those, I was actually born in Japan and raised mostly in Japan as well as in Australia. So I consider myself to be a bilingual international person, a bit of a third culture kid, I guess, because I was also raised partially in Australia. I feel like within that Japanese bubble, there's also like a little Australian bubble there as well. I actually been thinking about this recently throughout Asia Pacific Islander Heritage Month as well, but I actually didn't consider myself to be quote unquote Asian or East Asian until I started to live abroad, because when you're, back home, when I'm back home in Japan, everyone around me is Japanese. So we don't really think about how we're Asian or East Asian. And I think as an Asian person, I also understand that, we're not a monolith. So being grouped as Asian as opposed to being Japanese kind of still feels strange for me. And I just wanted to raise that because you might think, why doesn't she put Asian instead of Japanese? So that's just a little a snippet. In terms of being here, so I moved to the US 5 years ago. That's why I'm an immigrant. I actually came here in 2016. So the 5 years that I've been here have actually been very tumultuous. And it's just made me think a lot about what it means to be an immigrant, how you're perceived, et cetera, et cetera. And it's certainly been very interesting. So in my second year of being here, I actually met my current wife. We've been married for 3 years. We're an interracial couple. She is Panamanian Trinidadian. So there's a lot kind of going on there, but happily married for 3 years. And I guess that relates to my queerness and my pansexuality. And I'm sure we can talk about this more later, but for me, the sex or the gender of a person doesn't really matter to me in terms of attraction. And I actually had a very hard and very long time, it took a very long time for me to actually come out, especially within the cultural context of being in a country where same-sex marriage isn't legalized. It's not really something that is spoken about. It actually took me about 15 years for me to fully realize who I am in terms of my attraction to certain people. And that's one of my motivations for joining Welcome and taking a leadership role in Welcome, because I wanted to create an environment that was welcoming and accepting of everyone, no matter who you are or who you prefer to date or get married to. So that's a little introduction of me.
That's a wonderful introduction of you. So thank you so much for that. Anna, we'll be right back with you. I'd like to introduce another member of our employee resource groups, Christopher Sayezit. Christopher, welcome.
Thank you, Keisha. Thank you. And thank you everyone for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be with you today. So my name is Christopher Sayezit. I've been with Estée Lauder companies for the last 6 years now. I work on a small team focusing on international business development in emerging markets. So focusing on accelerating growth and developing our business in emerging markets like Brazil, Mexico, Thailand, Malaysia, etc. Like Anna, I'm a co-chair of Welcome. I'm one of 3, the LGBTQIA+ ERG for Estée Lauder companies. I'm originally French, as you can maybe hear it already. And I moved to New York a little over 10 years ago. So if we look at my Venn diagram and the different intersection of my identity, you'll notice today a lot of the speakers will have female as one of their identities. And I could have put male on my visual, but being the only cisgender male on the panel, but being a male doesn't really define who I am or shape who I've become. I haven't been marginalized because of the male, and on the contrary, it's come with quite its privileges. So the following 5 identities and intersection do define me the best. I'm Asian. My parents are from a country named Laos, next to Thailand. I grew up in France, and growing up in France in a predominantly white community with a large Asian family actually shaped a lot of the experiences I had as a bicultural person. I've never really fit in. I've never felt a full sense of belonging. There's a lot of colorism in Asian culture, and I've been told I don't look fully Asian. So I used to be told by my aunts that I look too white to be Asian, and at school, I used to be told that I was too Asian to be white. So never really fit in a single box. I went to a Catholic boarding school in Paris, and growing up as a Buddhist also put me on the periphery of things. I couldn't attend Bible study, and I missed out on a lot of bonding and connecting with my peers during that time. I've also started my career in finance and consulting. And as you probably know, it's a very hyper-competitive, male-dominated world. And my experience as a gay man at the time, I didn't think that coming out as gay would actually help me perform and get promoted. I thought it was weighing on me. And it's also worth mentioning that those two companies were leaders in inclusion and diversity. Well, they are today, and they were also at the time. But what does that tell us is really, it tells us that inclusion is much more granular than just checking a box. It's about creating this inclusive work environment for people like me, for gay people, for Black people, where people feel safe and empowered to be exactly who they are and be safe doing so. Moving to work in the cosmetic industry, which is arguably more welcoming industry for LGBT employees than finance, enabled me to form more trusting relationship and really pursue my goals and become an authentic leader as I progressed through my career. So all in all, I'm very proud of those 5 identities. They weren't always easy to grow up with, but they really shaped who I am today. For example, that desperately wanting to fit in taught me how to adapt to situation, adapt to different people, leadership style, communication style. And being gay really taught me to be resilient, accepting, and curious of others.
That is powerful. Thank you so much for sharing your story, sharing your identity. And I'm sure if we had additional opportunity to add more bubbles to this, there will be even more layers to you. So thank you so much for sharing that, Christopher. I'd like to transition to introduce our next panelist, Christina Shidende. Christina, welcome. I'm so happy to have you here with us.
Hi, Keisha. Hi, everyone. Thank you, She's Howard, for having me. I'm so excited to talk to you guys today. So my name is Christina Shidende. I am the Global Business Planning Manager for the Bumble and Bumble brand. I'm also the Social Media Chair for the Noble ERG Network of Black Leaders and Executives. I'm also the co-chair for the From Every Chair Leadership Program here at ELC. So I was born a female, identify as a woman, and I'm also millennial. I think those are the 2 simplest bubbles that I have up here. You would think being visibly Black, that would be pretty straightforward, but I was born to Jamaican parents, but I was raised by 2 women who were not Jamaican. My first mother was half Black and half Puerto Rican, and my second mother was half Black and half white. So when I talk to people about my identity, just from a racial perspective, being Black is incredibly nuanced for me. Sometimes I kind of trip over what that means because it's usually not very straightforward, right? Like I identify with the Southern Blacks, I identify with Puerto Ricans from New York City, I identify with so many different types of Black people. And I think that, it's very important because it speaks to how Black people are not a monolith, and no one race can be put into a box, right? I think the fact that I was raised by 2 women who, growing up, I didn't even realize that they were gay. I just thought that I was just very fortunate to have 2 women want to raise me because my birth parents couldn't. When I realized when I was in college that they were actually lovers, I found some love notes and stuff in the back of the closet. I was like, wow, they actually hid that for 20 years, right? And so when we talk about like the covering concept, it made me extremely sensitive to the fact that you never know who people are and what they really love and what they're passionate about because they may not feel safe to share that. So it made me sensitive, but it also made me very welcoming to people from different backgrounds, especially from the LGBT community, which I'm looking forward to speaking more about later on today. And then, I grew up in the South Bronx, New York City. For the longest time, it has been known to be a low-income neighborhood. And I think, it's really, we already know how tough it is to be Black in this country. We know how tough it is to be a woman in this country, and you layer in coming from a low-income neighborhood, you can really imagine how different that path can be to be towards becoming successful in this country. Being adopted by 2 women, being from a low-income neighborhood, not being my identity as a Black woman, I typically would hide that. I told people in high school I was half Puerto Rican myself because it was the easiest thing to do. But learning to own my identity is extremely powerful. I feel more empowered as an adult now, and I'm looking forward to welcoming other people to do the same thing.
Thank you so much, Christina. You reminded me about the moment when I discovered my own identity, because I'm hearing that throughout all of the speakers that we had today. And one of those pivotal moments was during my time at Howard University, where I learned about my history, I learned about my culture, and in doing that, learned about all those different characteristics that make me me. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I'll take a moment to introduce the next speaker, Brittany Eubanks. Brittany, it's wonderful to have you with us. Let's hear from you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'm really excited to be here to talk to you all today. I'm Brittany Eubanks. I am a manager of integrated marketing and communications for the Estée Lauder Company's Travel Retail Worldwide division. In a nutshell, that just means I work in communications in a capacity that promotes our brands in airport duty-free locations and downtown and border store duty-free locations. And I've been in the beauty industry and at Estée Lauder companies for 2 years. So yes, let's talk a little bit about my, my chart here. I think the things, like several panelists have said, there were 1,005 million things I could have put on here, but these are the ones that at the moment I think are definitely ones that I like to speak about and that are closest to, my current identity. So I will say, for me, I'm Black before I'm anything else. I'm Black before I'm any of these things on the board, and I won't have conversations about women's rights, about LGBTQ rights, without talking about being Black. So that's kind of first and foremost for me. And I bring that up because I didn't always feel that way. I didn't always accept or welcome my Blackness. And so it's great to, be here today and confidently say that to you all. I think I identify with being a lesbian and my queerness. I've been, I would say, out since I was about 15. And in such, I think in high school and college, I really focused on that part of my identity. And then I noticed that kind of, for me, shifted a little bit when I lived abroad. So from 2009 to 2018, I lived in China, in Beijing, Sanya, and I also lived in Hong Kong. So I was abroad for about 9 years. And in part of that time, part of those my identity, I decided to hide, and that would be, being a lesbian and my queerness. So I'll talk a little bit about like finding community abroad and here and how that's helped support me. And then lastly, or not least, which is also important to me, is being fat or body positive. I would say, honestly, this is something that I have just highlighted as part of my identity really within the last 6 months on my journey to continued self-awareness. I feel that this is extremely important to talk about, and the way that society, like many of these things, has shaped kind of our mind or our opinion on what the standards of beauty, standards of being a person, and how we look at fat bodies. So I'm again thrilled to be able to say that, and to say that with a strong amount of pride and security. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to, diving into a little bit more about each of these and sharing more of myself with you guys today.
Thank you so much, Brittany. And thank you, all the panelists, for the introduction. Brittany, stay with me for a second. I want to talk about covering. So I'm going to switch things up a little bit for us. So Brittany, Marilou, and Anna, one of the things that I know about all of you is that you lived and you worked abroad in Asia, and you also have a US perspective living in the United States. But you all mentioned this aspect of covering. So I'll ask you a question about that. But for everyone on the line, Dr. Kenji Yoshino is a professor that really coined this terminology of covering. And he said it's a strategy in which individuals downplay certain aspects, certain stigmatized aspects of their identity to blend into mainstream. We had the pleasure of welcoming Dr. Kenji Yoshina here with us 2 weeks ago, and even last year. So he is, we are very familiar with his work. So Anna, Marilou, and Brittany, covering a lot of times is linked to intersectionality, what the topic of today's focus. Can you speak a little bit more about the ways that covering has shown up at work, outside of ELC, or within your community based on the fear of being rejected?
Sure. I guess I can go first since I was just speaking. I think largely for me, for a lot of my, teenage years and through college, I very much was out wearing my rainbow everywhere. I went to a really small liberal arts women's college in Virginia. And I've felt comfortable with that part of my identity for a long time. And then in 2009, I moved to China, was meeting new people, meeting both Chinese people as well as expats. And all of a sudden, I didn't feel as comfortable in that part of my identity, and just really feeling like, who do I disclose this information to? Can I disclose them? It almost became like, do I trust them enough to share this? Because then what if they share it to someone else? So I was not out at work because of fear of, what my colleagues would say, just then also, assimilating. And because I'm fluent in Mandarin and I wanted to assimilate as close as possible to local culture, a lot of times when my colleagues might make comments, even in Chinese, about, homosexuality, I just kind of wouldn't say anything. I think I was sharing the other day with someone, I found myself going on dates with men just because my friends would set me up and I didn't want to say no, which is very unlike my personality, but all just for fear of being rejected. And I think it was because in the early days when I was in China, I had told one of my close friends there that I knew from when I was studying abroad. And I thought, she's just going to be like, oh, whatever. But she had this extremely negative kind of reaction and asked me if I wanted her to help me get mental help. And I was just blown away by her response. And so thereafter, I found it really hard to kind of tell anyone. And then I started, with my Western friends, and that felt a little more comfortable. And then when I would slowly tell my Chinese friends, I had one, I was so nervous. I remember we went out to dinner and I was shaking and I was like, sister, I have something really important I want to tell you, but I'm really worried. And she was like, oh my God, what is it? And this is all also happening in a second language. Mandarin is not my first language. So I'm having this conversation, super emotional. And I tell her, she grabs my hands and looks me in the eyes and laughs and says, I thought you had some sort of legal problem, we needed to hide a body. The way you came at this was so serious. And she's like, oh, whatever. And that just made me realize that, again, this not judging a book by their cover, because I was expecting, based on who I thought she was, and not who I knew she was, but who I thought that as a Chinese person, how she would respond. So that kind of, and then slowly, I would say near the end of my time in China, I came out a bit, or was a little bit more comfortable with it, especially after I found community in the Chinese queer community there. I do just quickly want to talk about a part of feeling rejected. There's a lot of racism in China in the Black community, so much so that I found myself, when people would ask me if I was African, just outright rejecting it, where I had an opportunity to say no, but I chose to just say no. And that's something that I look back on that I think I would have handled differently, because it was always this negative connotation that Africans are drug dealers, or that they were there to leech off the Chinese government system, all of these kind of things. And I was so worried about I don't want to be associated with that. I'm American, I'm Black, I'm not African. And you see that kind of passport discrimination. I remember when I went to Malaysia and I was going through the security check and they pulled me aside, random selected me from out the thing. And I had a passport cover over my cover. And when I took my cover off, he said, oh, you're American, you're not African, go ahead, go right through. And it was in that moment that I realized the privilege that I sit in, even though I have so many kind of minority identities attached to me. So that's a little bit about my situation with covering, and I'll let someone else kind of jump in there.
I totally relate to your story, Brittany. I mean, I was born and raised in Japan, as I mentioned, and hid my identity for a very long time. I was working at Japanese companies and felt like there wasn't a space for me. They did have a group of gay men who were, I guess, kind of out, but it just didn't seem like the place for me, especially as a woman. It was just really hard for me to find a place where I felt like I belong, especially because I identify as queer or pansexual, and I just felt like even those categories didn't really exist for me. Like lesbian didn't quite feel right, bisexual didn't feel quite the right thing for me, and I think I struggled a lot until I really came here, and I joined Welcome, and I found out about all of these different categories, and it just really expanded my understanding of what you could identify as. So I think that definitely really helped me. I was thinking about intersectionality and how this relates to it, but basically because my wife and I are an interracial couple, I feel like we get a lot of mixed kind of racial, homophobic, either comments or looks or whatever when we're walking down the street. And I remember my first couple of years when I was here and we just started dating, I would not want to hold her hand, or I would feel very nervous about holding her hand or acting like a couple. So I think that's just it's a very sad reality, but it's also real, in that I think the way that kind of women of color are fetishized, and then also being part of the LGBT community kind of puts us in like a very marginalized place. So just wanted to share that. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing. And Marilou, any additional thoughts on this?
Yes, I would say that my covering happened as a result of fear. As a young person, the fear that I would not be able to achieve the educational background that I wanted to achieve in order to be able to make a difference in this world was what caused my covering and my mother's assistance in my covering to take place. And I think that fear is a terrible thing. It's particularly terrible when you're a child. But that fear was a motivation for me, and it led to the covering, but it also led to the determination to do something with my life that would enable me to pay it forward or to give it back, depending on how you look at it, to make a difference. And I was mistaken when I started my career. I went into the criminal prosecution field thinking that if I put a lot of bad people in jail, I would make the world a better place and make a difference. I did put a lot of bad people in jail, but I did not make the world a better place. And I subsequently moved on and saw the light. But I think there are a lot of reasons that lead to covering. And I can honestly say that in my case, it was fear.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Now, when we understand covering and we understand how belonging can reduce the need for us to feel that we have to cover, we see that belonging is fostered even more throughout different ERG groups or affinity groups that you may be part of in your own organizations. Christina, I want to bring you back to the conversation. Christina, Christopher, and Brittany, can you reflect on the support that you felt as a Black employee from Welcome during BLM last year during Pride Month?
Last year during this month was very difficult for me. I found myself like upset all the time, watching Black Lives Matter protests out my window, reflecting on what happened to George Floyd and similar things that happened in this country. And so when I felt really grateful to work for ELC and to be a part of Welcome, because they didn't put that situation in a box and say, we understand the Black community is going through something right now, but we have our Pride Month celebrations that we do every year, and we're gonna, keep going with that. Pride Month typically is a time of celebration and joy and high energy, but I think Welcome understood that they had to make space but the feelings of sadness and stress and confusion that the Black community was going through last year. There was a town hall similar to this one where they raised conversation about intersectionality. And I think of the RGs to think about what other communities are going through and to help us feel seen and to help us feel safe coming to work every day. I didn't think that I was going to have the opportunity to feel how I was feeling as I was working, as I spoke to my coworkers prior to the town hall that Welcome had and the town hall that Noble had. So just these kind of conversations being raised just helped me feel a lot more comfortable, seen, and true to myself and how I was feeling.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, actually. I never had the opportunity to say thank you to Welcome and to the rest of the company for that, because it made a difference in how I worked for the rest of the year.
Thank you, Christina. And I, Anna was actually instrumental in the reaction we've had within Welcome. It was almost like a knee-jerk reaction when we were obviously looking at the BLM happening. Pride last year was a convergence of both, actually. It was a convergence of the fight for LGBTQ rights and Black Lives Matter, and really the birth of the modern movement that we see for LGBTQ equality was led by Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, who are Black trans women. And it's important to recognize that today, because it's the reason why we have rights, right? So while it was important for us to recognize Pride, it was more important for us to recognize the subsegment of the community that's hurting the most. And I think that's what happened with our Pride programming. So just to give a little bit more context and crystallize what I'm talking about, is we had an entire programming, a theme for Pride events, and so did the brands. So yes, Lauder company is a portfolio of 30 prestige beauty brands, and we planned things well ahead of time, as you can imagine. But when things started to unfold with the Black Lives Matter movement, we at Welcome pivoted very, very fast and said, there's no way we can proceed with this. The objective here is to show support and really be there for our Black colleagues, family, and friends. But we also went back to the brands and say, hey, we know what you have in mind for Pride. This is not okay. You cannot proceed with what you had planned 3 months ago. And these are the reason why. So it was fitting at that point that the Pride theme and would center around solidarity with the Black community and around the notion of intersectionality. So we researched and shared resources, and Anna put together a long list of organizations we could donate to and way to take action and speak up. And we organized fundraising individually, but also as a company, amplify the voices of our Black colleagues and really use as much of our platform as the LGBTQ ERG to help. So Pride is a moment to celebrate, to recognize the work we still have to do ahead. But it's also a moment, is foremost a moment for all marginalized people to come together and in support of something that's bigger than just ourselves. And that's where I think the notion of intersectionality comes in, because at that point, it was evident to us that we had to be allies to our Black colleagues and Noble as an ERG.
Absolutely. As a follow-up to that, how do you all think that employees can get involved in driving inclusion forward at work and within their communities? And I guess the second part B of that would be, were any of you, Christina and Christopher, as a follow-up to that, were any of you involved in driving the equity commitments that our company made in response to the social and racial injustices following the murder of George Floyd?
Christina, do you want to start?
Yeah, I can start. So I know there are many ways through the ERGs to get involved, small and large. I will say, after everything happened last year, I was pretty enraged and felt like, okay, I need to become an activist of some sort. How can I get involved? And luckily, there was an opportunity to work on a mentorship/sponsorship program for Black employees here at ELC. The pull-up challenge kind of identified within corporate America the lack of leadership representation of Black employees at higher levels of corporate America. So in collaboration with the Global Talent and I&D team, Noble, we work together to create this program, the From Every Chair Leadership and Development Program. And right now we have about 300 participants who are paired with leadership throughout the company. We have an external vendor who provides leadership development courses, and we have discussions where we really share talent throughout all levels at the company to be able to access higher level roles at some point in their career in the near future. So this was the best way that I can get involved and to really fight for change for the Black community. But I think that there are many different ways if you get in touch with your ERG leaders, I&D team, Global Talent, to make a change for any marginalized community at ELC.
Yeah, and on the same vein, the same experience with us actually, and a lot of the people on this panel have contributed directly or indirectly to shape new policies or new commitments to drive inclusion and diversity at a lot of companies. And one of the ways we're doing this at Welcome is to have the conversations with, for example, our benefits team, looking at expanding benefits for transgender employees, looking at reaching this best practices, because we don't want to be second to the game, right? We want to be trailblazing this. This is part of our DNA. We want to be the best at this, and the way we drive this is through conversation, and also the HRC, so the Human Rights Campaign, has a corporate equality index every year. We've had the perfect score for the last 10 plus years, and we're driving this internationally. So this will be launching in Mexico soon and other countries in Latin America. And we're partnering with affiliates around the world to drive inclusion and diversity as a company. And I think, many companies have expressed a clear stance on social inequities, and that's what we've been doing. And we have also revolutionized the way we address it. Marilou was at the inception of it and has seen how large this enterprise has become, and how many people now were involved, and it has become from it has gone from a nice to have to a clear capability differentiator, where I can say that ELC is really best in class. And so it's a completely different ballgame. We've looked at our culture, our processes, our talent acquisition, development. We've looked at our systems. Right now, we're partnering with HR to change the way our employees self-identify from male, female, and other to a selection that is much more diverse and all-encompassing. We're looking at benefits. So there's not a single rock left unturned. And that's how we really get involved in driving ID&E.
Excellent. I love how you phrase that. I want to ask a follow-up question to Brittany and Anna, since I have you. Before I do, for everyone on the call, if you have specific questions that you'd like to ask any of the panelists or myself, please put them in the Q&A, so we'll hold some time to have them answered. Brittany and Anna, how can companies and different brands support the LGBTQIA+ community and celebrate Pride all year round? And beyond that, how can companies ensure to equally celebrate the diversity of their employees, not only during their respective Heritage Month?
Yeah, I can start. So I think for companies, I think it's really important not just to focus on Pride Month. And we see this across the industry and across other industries as well, right? The month of June rolls around, everyone's got their rainbow logo, rainbow flags blazing, and then the rest 11 months of the year, you don't see anything. And we really wanted to change this year. So at Welcome, we actually changed our Pride Month activities and call them now Pride 365. So it's basically, celebrating Pride and the diversity of our community every single day of the year. Christopher was actually really crucial in terms of like spearheading this effort. But we actually set up, I think it was 5 different key moments, what we're calling key moments. So obviously, Pride Month is a really big one. LGBT plus History Month in October is a really big one. We also wanted to put the spotlight on our transgender community members. So Transgender Day of Visibility, as well as Transgender Day of Remembrance. I think, I always forget. Those are very important moments, and we've really tried to celebrate those by hosting, different types of events. So we've had panel discussions featuring our very own employees who identify as trans. We've had trans educators come in to speak about, different topics within the LGBT community, specifically focusing on trans issues. And so it's actually been a really enriching year in that, Pride hasn't really been just June. Of course, we're doing a lot of things for June, but it's really been focused kind of on all of these different key moments. So I think that's definitely a way that companies can contribute by really bringing these issues front and center throughout the year, not just for the month of June.
Thank you so much. Brittany.
Sorry. So, Anna really talked about like getting involved in like the company's programming. I would like to talk about it from like a peer perspective. So for me, I think when I first joined the company, I signed up for Women's Leadership Network. I signed up for Noble. I signed up to AAPI. I signed up for Welcome, of course, but I wasn't super active until, last May. Which again, I think AAPI month, or AAPI or RERG, they also, along with Welcome, I felt a lot of support as allies because that kind of happened at the end of May, beginning of June. But what I really liked seeing come out of that were these people stories. I can't remember quite when it was, and Anna will probably laugh because I had read somewhere on one of the interviews or something kind of a little bit about her. And then I found myself Googling her. This is kind of embarrassing. And somehow found her and her wife's registry and because at the time I was also in a interracial relationship with another woman. And for some, like seeing that and seeing people that I felt like I could identify with and felt like there was space for me at this company for this type of thing, to be me, just really made me feel good. Same with, Noble. They had a kind of this, I can't remember if it was kickboxing or if it was like meditation. And then after that, we just had like a wrap really quick. And I started learning about more of my colleagues and like, I think, especially as Black people, how we identify and show up to corporate America, and seeing all of us kind of pull the mask off a bit gave me that sense of being welcomed. For myself, I'm not, transgender, but I forgot who was the first person I saw with their personal pronouns in their signature. And I kind of was like, why don't I have my why didn't I do that? Well, I guess because I thought that was like not acceptable in corporate America, but it only takes that one person to do it. And then our team, again, off of the back of all the great work that the ERGs are doing, we created Noble Travel Retail site, our own inside of our own D&I for travel retail. We had the Transgender Law Society come in. Within the next day, our entire team had their personal pronouns in their signature. And I really think it's those people stories that get shared throughout the company or that are on like the intranet. I used to be a little intranet adverse, I'll be honest, but when I realized that's where I would get access to who these people are within the company, and I've started reaching out to people for coffee dates. I want to get to know them on a personal level. And I think you can find that sense of, community within this company. And I think that's the great thing about it, and really the kind of sharing of people stories. So I would encourage companies to share stories, and I would encourage employees to share their story and not be afraid to speak your truth. Because you never know who's reading them or who you're inspiring or who you're helping along their journey as well.
That's excellent. We have one more minute before we have closing remarks. So we'll take a question from the Q&A. So thank you so much for all the contributions from the participants. So one of the questions that we received that touches on what you just, where you just left off, Brittany. How do you support managers that want to be allies? Allies for intersectionality, allies for all the different levels of identity that show up within our own respective intersectionality. Any initial thoughts, anyone on the panel?
Well, let me just say we have had programs around allyship in terms of what it means and how to be one. I think that one of the things that comes very naturally to a lot of our organization is the concept of allyship. And if I can go back to last year, after the murder of George Floyd, many of our ERGs and others who were not members of ERGs came forward to say, what can I do? How can I help? And we formed an ERG Alliance for Justice, which was a consortium of groups who wanted to support Noble and the issues that were going on at the time. So it's almost an instinctive part of our culture, but we do have opportunities to help people understand what they can do and how they can best be allies.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Marilou. At this time, I will transition to our closing remarks. As much as the great time that we've spent with each other, I want to thank all the panelists. Thank you so much. Now we'll transition this to Sharon Lewis Strange to close us off. Thank you so much.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Sharon Strange Lewis, Director of Alumni Relations at Howard University. And I just have to say, yet again, another amazing panel discussion. Intersectionality is such an important topic, especially during this important time in which we're living right now. I want to give a big Bison thank you to our very own Bison sister, Keisha Regu from the School of Business, class of 2008, for masterfully moderating this powerful panel. And another big thank you to all of the panelists. You all were extremely transparent in your stories. And I think we all are better people for listening to what you all had to say this evening. You know, for many people, particularly women of color, Black women, we've often found ourselves trying to decide how we're going to show up and how we're going to display our various social identities so that we won't appear to be overpowering or oppressive. And we've been, I guess, covering before covering was actually defined or became a thing. And it's a very fine dance that we all, at some point in our lives, participate in. It appears as if ELC has gotten the concept right in terms of their employee resource groups and the way that employees are allowed to show up within your corporation. Here are my few takeaways from today's panel. One, employee resource groups are important because they're more than just checking off a box. It's about empowering your employees to really be their true authentic self at work. And we also have to be very sensitive to people because we really have no idea what they may have chosen to cover up, what they're covering, because they don't want everyone to prejudge them based on who they are. So we have to be very sensitive when we are interacting with different people. And I also, one good thing that I take away from today is that there's really room at the table for everybody. You don't have to conceal who you are, just show up and be your authentic self. And I think that there's room enough at the table for everyone and that there's space for you. So that was one of my key takeaways today. I would encourage you all to join us on June 23rd for our brand overview with Clinique products. Also, within the next couple of weeks, be on the lookout on your email because you will receive an invitation to apply to the She's Howard Own Your Power Beauty Industry Accelerator Program at Estée Lauder Companies. And I think that I encourage you all to look in your inbox for those invitations so that you can go forth and present your application for that because it's going to be an amazing program. Thank you so much for your continued support of She's Howard. And as always, make sure you continue to own your power. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a good evening.